All right. Welcome to the Happy Hour Money Podcast. I am Josh Bennett here with my co-host Isaiah Douglas in our slightly put together new studio.
Yeah, watch out, Joe Rogan. We were just joking about that before we got started. So for those that are listening just to the audio only, you have to check out the video. So head over to YouTube. Like, subscribe, all the stuff we're supposed to tell you to do. This will look very different once we get it completely done, but this is the first record in the studio.
Yeah, which unfortunately we don't have Joe Rogan's budget to build this studio, which would be nice.
Spotify, hit us up.
We're making do with what we got.
Yeah,
but
we'll take half. We'll take $50 million for the podcast if you're looking.
if you're listening, Record Studios. So we have a fun topic, especially for those who have kids out there. So the topic we're going to discuss is just how to raise sort of money-minded children or children that are successful with their finances. Just because I know growing up in life, you don't get a lot of assistance from the education system, unfortunately, when it comes to just traditional personal finances. So, a lot of times it's on us as parents to do this in honor of, I actually just had my second child about 4 days ago. So I figured this was a pertinent topic right now. And so we're going to dive in, and Isaiah and I both have dealt with a lot of financial planning amongst families and stuff. So we're going to kind of give you the best tips of what we've heard throughout our career as financial planners. But kicking us off, Isaiah, what are some of the tips and tricks for either new parents that have older kids? What are some of the best tips you got?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that I would say is we've both worked for what I would say is traditional finance companies in the past. And so we've seen these situations where I've seen very successful families that then, the third generation is also still like a real estate developer making a bunch of money and like very successful and independent. And then, doctors and like people that are successful in their own right. But then you also see families that, early on when these, companies that have shaped a lot of what we do day in and day out, and, they pass on, stock that has a cost basis of like less than a penny that's now super, super expensive. And it's a 50 or 60-year-old person that's literally never had to deal with money or think about it. Or, they're 40 years old and their parents are still paying their mortgage. And so, they can be a family with a net worth of, $100 million, but they still have kids that have no idea what's going on. So I think one of the big things that I would encourage people to talk about is just, things aren't free. And I know that seems crazy, but like my 3-year-old understands, like I go to work so that we can do fun things. And so that, there is a cost to these things. Like groceries aren't free. We don't go in the store and just grab stuff and leave, right? Like there is a cost associated with it. And so I think including them in conversations, and if they ask questions, like engaging and not just like, I'm tired or I'm busy, which is easy to say right now, right? But in those moments, like use it as an educational moment and explain to them why we do certain things. And if you do as they get older, so right now we have young kids, so it's not like we're going to go through a budget with them right now. Like that's not a good use of our time or their time, and they wouldn't get anything from it. But as they're older, like really explaining and sitting down, I'm like, hey, here are the costs. This is what it looks like. Giving them, some of the idea of this is what, I pay a mortgage and this is what it costs, and like trying to bring them in. And I think most parents are afraid that if they share this information with their kids, like their kids are going to go tell everyone, or it's, oh, that's personal, I don't want to share that. It's like, no, like for your kids to be ready to have those kind of conversations and understand that as they grow up, they need to understand what it looks like now. And so I think while they're living under your roof, you have to engage with them. And I think really, I would encourage, late, call it 5th, 6th grade, but especially really in middle school and older, you have to start getting them more involved, and they might not be overly interested. And that's okay. But so many times I know we see this with spouses that come to work with us, even young families. One typically is the one that's interested in finance, and then the other one is like, oh, I don't care. And I don't think that it should always be that way. I think they should care. And I think part of that starts at home with kind of the lived experience of what money looks like. And we can chat on that here in a second. But what about you, Josh? How do you view talking with kids or family and the dynamic of finances?
I mean, to your point, I think it's super huge to just have open communication about money in the household. And like you said, just whenever you are, coaching kids, teaching kids about money, like it's never going to be a topic they enjoy right away, just because, until they get, in that situation where they're, trying to save for their first car or trying to save for something and, really understand the value of like, hey, I worked, 20 hours and I got, $500 and I got to work, 300 more of those to get, X thing that I want, right? They really don't necessarily understand the value of a dollar until they've done that. But there's still ways to like help, educate them and teach them on all sorts of different topics with money. I mean, one of the things that I actually, I credit with why I got into finance in the first place. For those who don't know, like my traditional background was not in money at all. And so like didn't really have financial planning as like a career path at all. And I mean, now I would see it no other way. But one of the things when I was sort of going through this like life crisis of what I wanted to do with my life, one of the things I remembered is like, my grandmother actually, so or I guess my grandparents, they bought me like a mutual fund and some stocks and stuff as like in a like custodial account when I was probably like 11, 12, somewhere in there, 10, somewhere in there. But one of the stipulations was like I had to go meet with the banker, broker every quarter, learn about how my portfolio is doing. I mean, it wasn't not a lot of money at all, but like that was the stipulation was I had to go like, learn about what was in there, like learn about how Coca-Cola was doing. And they're from Atlanta. So like that was a big deal for them. But those things, I mean, like, so I just coming into the land of finance eventually, like I was sort of way ahead of the curve. A lot of my peers that were getting into finance just because I hadn't had that, just that basic understanding, which I never realized kind of at the time how beneficial that was for me. And actually, I was interested in it, but still kind of would have preferred to play outside on a random day instead of going to the bank. But now I would see no other way. So I think having those kind of conversations, having those topics, and it doesn't have to be, a trust fund or anything that you're giving your kids. But I mean, $100 thrown in an ETF that makes make sure you are showing your kids how it's doing, making sure they're tracking it, and all these things. Like even simple acts like that can make a huge difference, just as long as you have an open communication and are kind of coaching them and making them participate.
What do you think about opening a bank account for a kid for when they get birthday money, they get different things, and then they start to save into that? So hey, grandma and grandpa gave me some cash, or they gave me this. How old and when do you think about starting to open up that account for a kid?
Personally, I think the day they're born. I mean, just to me, it's like, you can never start saving too early. And so, I mean, as soon as they're born, they're often getting money from relatives or things like that. And so just having a place, it doesn't necessarily have to be in their name per se, but having like, a joint account amongst the parents that are sort of earmarked. Like this is what I've done for my kids is I have an investment account for them, but it's in me and my wife's name, just sort of, earmarked for their future, right? And so I think doing something like that is super important. And then I forget who told me this a long time ago, but it was actually one of my clients. I thought this was a really cool idea. But they essentially, anytime their kids do get birthday money or get money from grandparents or do chores, and the chores one's I think the one that was coolest to me, or actually even like job. But like every dollar they saved, parents would match it. So just basically like
the 401k for mom and dad. I like it.
Yeah, exactly. So it was like
employer match.
It was a way like so the kids started rapidly realizing, hey, if I save, I get double my money.
Yeah.
So it was a pretty cool idea for like, all right, if I want to get to this car faster, get to this, like incentivized to save money instead of going to spend it right. So it's that incentivizing that delayed gratification, which I think is the hardest thing as humans. So I thought that was really cool. But yeah, I mean, starting that early and having some sort of system of like, okay, if grandparents give money, maybe parents match it, or if nothing else, you're just investing for your child early and letting compounding interest do its work.
Yeah, I love it.
Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I look at it, and this is going to be a surprise to no one, right? Like, so the day that our second was born, bought Bitcoin the day of, made sure it was right after the fact, and they have those sats stay saved away, and we'll be able to accrue purchasing power over time. And so I think it's the same idea, whether you think more traditional finance or Bitcoin, like taking self-custody, storing some things, and saving any way that you think is appropriate as a parent, I think is a cool thing that then you can educate and teach them, whether you think Bitcoin is great, a scam, whatever, right? That's one thing, the same way that like holding cash or saving an ETF. I think that idea of just showing them like everything that we bring into the house, we don't just consume it all. Like that will get you into trouble and only is going to lead to heartache and challenges in the future. So how can we take, what we've been blessed with and do good with it? And I think another interesting thing that I have heard from different people is, if they are charitably inclined, and one thing that I loved, and this again is from clients. So the funny thing is, like, we learn a lot from clients too. Like that selfishly, like we get a lot of great information. Like we might dish out some good stuff, but like we get so much back.
Especially when it comes to raising kids, because like everybody has different ideas on.
Totally, yeah. Crowdsource it, right? Yeah, like exactly. And if they have an 18-year-old, I have a 3-year-old and an 8-month-old. I've never raised an 18-year-old. I don't know that. So let's hear what they say, and you take it with a grain of salt. And each kid is different, but one thing that I heard that I thought was really cool, and it was around the holiday time, is when they give, they were going to like dole out a certain amount that the kids had to give their money to something, and they had to choose, and they had to go through like why they wanted to give the money here. And, you know, they were going to say, hey, here's your $500. You do whatever you want, but you have to pick, and you have to kind of explain and bring it back to us as parents, like why you're giving that money there and what is it going to go towards, and like doing a little bit of research. And I thought that was really cool. And again, for clients, you know, I always tell people like 50% are really passionate about giving, 50% are like, I don't really care. It's always your money, you make the decision. But for those that do want to give, I think it's an interesting way to loop in kids and encourage that if that's something that's important to you as the parent of giving back to, you know, things locally in the community. It doesn't always have to be money. It could also be like, hey, we're going to go work on a Saturday and clean up something. And I've seen that work really well for families as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think both of those ideas are really good. Yeah, and trying to get kids to be charitably inclined, especially young, is not always
sharing is not
innate task.
Yeah, sharing's not always easy.
Actually, one cool thing kind of along that lines that my aunt and uncle used to do was like they'd actually, for like, instead of like in lieu of doing like Christmas gifts and stuff, they would actually, you know, do donations for cousins and stuff, like, but like send you kind of like the, hey, you know, I bought this cow for this, you know, tribe on your behalf kind of thing, which I always thought was a really cool idea. It was just like, hey, instead of, you know, getting too much crap that you don't really need, you know, doing some good in the world on behalf of somebody else, I think it's a cool idea too. So if you don't want your kids to just get loaded up for Christmas and stuff with the holidays coming up, you know, there's a good idea to pass on to grandma and grandpa and stuff of, you know, alternatives. But what about older kids? Like, what are some of the like ideas? Like, I mean, we talked about bank accounts. What about like credit cards? Do you think it's a good idea to get your kid a credit card? You know, what about jobs? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I definitely think the job piece, like the idea of like you need to work, so proof of work is important. Like go out and do something, even if it's small. And I love the idea that you talked about, that the client said that, you know, if they saved from that job, they're then going to, you know, match that amount. Like, I think that's a really good idea, because especially if it's, you know, a job, and again, depending on the kid, I think if you have a male child, they should go and work a really grunt, hard, sucky job. Like, again, growing up in Indiana, I've baled hay, I've worked in really cold, nasty, like shitty environments, and like you meet some people and you talk to people that, you know, they wish they weren't there, but like the phase of life, like they've made decisions that led them to be there, especially the cold, crappy kind of job that I worked at. But you know what, like, you know that that's temporary for you, and it's a good encouragement to be like, hey, I need to apply myself to move forward. And, you know, mom and dad might say stuff over and over and over again, but it just doesn't ever sink in. But going out and experiencing those jobs and working with people that maybe haven't made the best life decisions, that are kind of stuck now, like they may say things that will resonate with your kid that will help encourage them into the future. And if you've never worked a shitty job, yeah, you don't have that experience. And so I think it's super important to have those jobs. And sometimes I think even just working retail or being a server, I know my wife has talked about, like, she worked a lot of serving jobs. She's really good at it, made good tips, but you learn to be kinder to people because you get treated like crap at times. And I think that's a really important one. Also, the idea of like customer service and selling is like a really good one to learn early. And so if you're interacting with people that are going to be difficult, or, you know, raise their voice, and like dealing with pressure and people that just are not nice, I think is a really good thing that, regardless of what someone does in their life, is applicable moving forward, because you're going to deal with people and you're going to have to deal with difficult people. It's unfortunate, but that is just life. And I think those are both important. I know the credit card thing you feel more strongly about than I do. Credit scores are important. You can build those up over time. I don't necessarily think, you know, if I'm in high school that they need a credit card, but I know you see differently. So I want to hear you chat on that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And really quick before I dive into that too, just kind of touching base on the job thing. I mean, I would agree. I think every kid should have a job at some point. I mean, I forget the exact like age of, you know, when you can legally start.
I think it's 16.
Yeah, it's either 14 or I think it's 14 with parent consent and 16 without parent consent, something like that. But
farm labor, you can start them younger.
Yeah, I mean, well, and like if you're a business owner too and you have kids, like one of the, you know, getting into like tax saving strategies.
Yeah.
Actually, hiring your kids is one of the best tax saving strategies. Plus, like, you can set up like Roth IRAs. And there's all these benefits to hiring your kids. And, you know, if you're have your own business, there's no child labor laws for your own kids, so you can hire them like super young.
Models, photos on the website.
Yeah, models, photos on the website. You know,
clerical work,
shredding paper, data entry. And, you know, hell, most 8-year-olds are better at social media than most.
TikTok account took off after Junior took over.
Little Timmy took over. But yeah, So, I mean, I think that's super important to get a job just for all sorts of reasons. But yeah, I agree. Actually, I'm going to say whether you're a girl or a boy, you should work the shittiest job possible at least once in your life, because then every other job seems easy too. Like, I mean, we always talk about our time at, like, you know, for me, it was my kid jobs as like a teenager were a breeze compared to my year as like a call center rep for Charles Schwab. It was psychologically brutal. But anyways, yeah, so on the credit card thing, yeah, I mean, I think it's, you know, I did a bunch of teaching for sort of high school age kids for a long time on like just sort of finance 101 and just how to set yourself up. And man, I don't think it's like important for like a 12-year-old to have a credit card, but once you start getting towards college age, or if you're not going to college, getting towards, you know, being independent, I do think it's important to have a credit card, whether if the child's not 18 yet, you know, having one co-signed with a parent, you know, say starting at 16 or whatever, or if they are 18, just under their own name. There are a lot of credit cards out there that are like, will basically give you like a $500 limit, so you can't like ruin your life too much. And even if you're co-signed with a parent, the parent could get much more credit. Yeah, like you don't need a lot of credit, but like the reason I think it's important is these days credit scores sort of like, I mean, whether I agree with it or not, sort of dictate a lot of things that happen to your kid right after college. Or, you know, if they're not going to college and just going straight in the workforce, even more so. I mean, like, for example, every employer is going to do a credit check as part of a job. If you have, you know, piss poor credit, it could prevent you from getting a job. Same with like apartments, especially like in the big cities like San Francisco, New York, where apartments are very competitive. They could not have trouble getting a decent apartment just because of lack of a credit score. So especially if like, you know, you graduate college, like it just takes time to build up credit. So if you're leaving college and don't have a good credit, you may be living in the slums for a little bit. So I think one of the things that parents can do is basically get some starter credit card. And, you know, I think 16 is usually a good age where, you know, kids are starting to get out and drive on their own and stuff anyways. So just make them start, that's their gas card. You know, you teach them, again, open communication, show them how to pay it off every month. Make sure it's on auto pay, all these different things to make sure they're not harmed or affected by the credit card, and teach them good credit card behaviors. But by having that, at least they're building their track record of good credit history for spending, good credit history for paying things off. By the time they actually need it, they'll be in a good credit score position. So that way, you know, it won't be an inhibition. And I think, too, by starting that education earlier of like, hey, here's how you handle a credit card responsibly, it could get them, you know, prevent them from having a lot of pain later on.
Yeah, I think it's good points. I was just listening at it and thinking through another, I think, a good teachable moment and something that you could also kind of take into consideration, which, again, for us with younger kids, not necessarily there, but when they're older, you can think about, hey, we want to go and do a vacation, right? And helping say, hey, here are options, here are costs, what do you want to do? And if the kids want to do more, maybe, you know, part of your match, or you could tie it into like the employment. They get extra options if they've done these certain things or they did their chore. Like, hey, these are the extra features that you get, or this extra little bonus trip that we're going to do, or this experience while we're on vacation. I think that could be an interesting way to teach, like, hey, this stuff doesn't come just fall from the sky. We get to, you know, get this plane ticket and this hotel and this rental car and these experiences. Like, if you are working for it, you get to, you know, increase it. And if not, maybe we don't get to take a school vacation this year. Maybe there's a reason for that. And I think sharing like success stories and when things don't go well, I think is also important. So it's not always like, yeah, money, you know, is just always there. Because I think when we chat with clients and go through conversations around like, hey, my favorite question is a lot of times like, what did money mean growing up? And I think you can boil it down to two key areas. It's either freedom or security. And I think for most people, that's the way that they look at it. If you boil everything down, it's either it wasn't there and, you know, it was a struggle and it was always a point of contention, or my parents got divorced because of things. And like divorce and money is like really, you know, attached at the hip a lot of times. So if you help educate your kids early on, like, think about that. Like, if you could impact and make a better marriage possibly for them, or a better relationship in the future with a significant other, that's another like really important reason. I know as a parent, like there's a lot of, you know, weight on your shoulders to do things. You're going to mess up. Lord knows that. Like, no parent is perfect, but it's like, if you're intentionally trying to have these conversations, I think you'll do, you know, right by your kids, and you don't have to be perfect, but it is just simply approaching it and, you know, the good, bad, and ugly. And I think that can be hard to be vulnerable about that stuff, but just be open and honest when things are going well. And if you are a business owner, when you have a banner year and things are really working well, like, let them know this is why we've been successful. If the economy's in the, you know, the toilet and things are struggling, and you kind of explain like, hey, we're not going to Disney this year because of XYZ reasons, right? This is maybe another year, but we got to wait until things change. And I think that can be an important piece to help explain that the delayed gratification piece. Again, like you can't just always say yes to everything. And I've seen friends, going back to the credit card piece, where they can't really trust themselves with a credit card. So now they're more of like debit card and cash because they racked up those bills and they just spent like crazy, and they know better. Like they're smart. It's not like they didn't think they were ever going to pay it. They just did it and then kind of caught themselves thinking, oh crap, I shouldn't have spent, $7,500 last month. And now I don't have a way to pay for that for, 12 months or 24 months or whatever. And then you get on that cycle of just the bad decisions, and it takes a while to dig out of it. And to prevent that, again, starting things earlier and building good habits, I think help accomplish that.
Yeah, for sure. What are your thoughts on, setting up your kids for like success when it comes to like college, sort of starting off their life post empty nest?
I think college has to be reworked. Like, again, depends on where the age of the kid is, but I think having a what's the return on investment conversation early. So like Emily and I joke about this, my wife and I, she went to school to be a teacher, and I think it's really hard to justify this expense versus what you get at the end of it to become a teacher. And that's sad. That stinks. Like, we need good teachers, but the math just doesn't work. Even if you go to a state school, a lot of times, like the ROI there for the time spent and the energy spent just doesn't make any sense. And so I think sitting down with kids and saying like, hey, we want to support you and we love you and we are going to be here for you, but help them understand, like, it's great that you want to pursue this and that's awesome, but what are you actually going to do with it, and how are you actually going to pay for it? And even if you have all the funds, you're going to pay for everything and all that, like helping them understand the trade-offs of this decision is important. And again, they're not going to want to hear from, mom and dad to tell them what they need to do with their life. But I think walking through, these are your interests, this is kind of opportunities, and helping them explore those. So if you have connections in different industries, letting them go shadow, let them grab coffee with someone that is doing that so they can talk and learn what that role is. Go shadow for a day when they're in high school. Pull them out of school, go sit and actually experience what someone does on a day-to-day basis so they don't make that mistake. And going back, I want you to share your story of what you thought you were going to do in college and how it switched, because you don't want them to get so far down a road and get kind of like this sunk cost into this education where they feel like that's the only thing I can do. That's the only thing I can do because I spent this money and I got to do that. And it's like, no. Like, look at what are the opportunities, where are your skill sets best, and then how can you earn a living doing that? And I think so many times the advice and guidance is, oh, follow your passion, follow your passion. That's wonderful, but passion doesn't pay rent. It doesn't pay your car payment. It doesn't pay these other things. And that sounds harsh, but it's true. And I mean, we can argue till the cows come home, but I'm sorry, passion doesn't pay the bills, and you have to figure out something that you're good at, that you can enjoy, but that also can sustain life, or you're going to be there to be funding their lifestyle, and that's going to raise a kid that, going back, you're paying the mortgage and you're paying for this stuff, and oh, by the way, when they have kids, let's say, you're going to be paying and doing all these extra things, and do you want that, and is that the right way? Maybe you want to do that, and that's fine, that's your decision, but I think most parents want their kids to be independent and successful in their own right. And I think for self-esteem and all kinds of other things, the kids want to be self-sustaining. They don't want to have to lean on someone else for the most part.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And one thing I think too is being unbiased with the future that your child chooses. I mean, like to your point, like with Emily, like obviously the world needs good teachers, and I never want to disincentivize a teacher that would be a wonderful teacher from going to get a college degree because of the return on investment, right? Because we need those people, right? But that being said, that's obviously a very cognizant decision of like, okay, I'm making this trade-off of wealth creation versus living a fulfilled life that fulfills to me as an individual, right? My calling. But they're frankly, the family needs to be in a financial position to be able to do that. Whether that's saving more aggressively as the parents to put their kids through a teaching education, etc. But also, I think it's in our society these days, it's sort of a stigma to want to be a blue collar worker or a crafts worker or a trades worker, and
they can make bank too right now,
and that could actually be one of the best financial decisions a kid could make. I gotta tell people all the time, like one of the wealthiest clients I've ever had was a welder. Like he was an underwater, I mean, it's a super dangerous job, but like he was an underwater welder for a oil rig company and just made stupid amounts of money, like putting like tech workers and stuff to shame, attorneys to shame. And he worked 3 months a year. Like, for someone that wants life work balance and make doesn't get much better than that. But we know trades tradespeople, all different types, plumbers, you name it, that are making 6 figures, 7 figures, as business owners making well beyond that. Like, it just all depends. So I think really having an open mind about what your kid wants to do, and not having some of the preconceived notions of like, oh, it's not a good job to be a plumber, where plumbers can make tons of money and it can be a super fulfilling mentally job because you get to see the benefits of your labor right then and there.
What kind of lifestyle do they want to live too? I think it's important because not, again, going back in the teacher thing and not harping on that, but if they're fine and they're not, hey, they don't need a lot of material things and they're a good saver, they can still live the lifestyle they want. But if they are like, hey, I really like all these nice, fine things, or want to be able to travel the world and do all these different, as a teacher, it's going to be more of a struggle. Like, you can still travel on a budget, you can still do these different things. But I think as a parent, you also need to understand who they are as an individual and share with them and say, hey, I get it that you don't want my advice and guidance, that you're probably not going to, want to listen to me, but the things that you want to accomplish in this income, it's going to be a mismatch. It's the champagne taste beer budget type thing that a lot of people just struggle with. And it's like, no, I'll just do both. And it's like, okay, now that's when you wake up and it's 15 or 20 years later and you haven't saved anything and you're in debt. And you're like, how the hell did I get here?
In life, life gets really hard. But actually, along your idea of like the vacation, that'd be a good idea to be like, okay, you like $20,000 vacations. Well, how are you going to pay for that as a teacher? Like, let's budget it out and let's try to do a vacation on a teacher's salary and see.
Yeah, or you're going to live in a different spot than the place you want to live. You can live in the nicer place and no vacations, or you can have the nicer vacation and live in a less nice spot, and the finishes and the car you drive and all these things.
There's trade-offs to everything.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people just struggle with that because if it's been there and they come from a family that has been wealthier, that's been able to afford those things, it just seems like, oh, that'll happen. And unless you're going to help fund and support the lifestyle, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, and I want to circle back real quick to your idea, your thought. So I think this is super important, but doing shadowing as well. So like you mentioned my story. So my story, like I mentioned earlier, I did not plan on being in finance. So my original plan was I was a student athlete, raised by an attorney, and so I had the idea that I was going to be an entertainment lawyer. And I was like, all right, this would be the path I want to go on, right? Well, I shadowed an entertainment lawyer my, junior year of college and was like, this is the worst lifestyle ever. I do not want to do this. And so I decided against going the law school path. And that's when I sort of got lost in what I want to do. I mean, granted, it all worked out. Luckily found my path based on a really good mentor I had found in college. So, I mean, luckily my college tuition wasn't completely worthless. But for all means and purposes, I mean, I graduated with a film major and, some like a business minor, luckily. But, not getting that law school education sort of set me back trying to find a career. And I'd say my ROI from college is basically zero other than finding a good mentor. So, I mean, I think it's really important to if your kids are thinking of a certain career path, it's not always exactly what you envision or view in your mind. Like, sometimes the reality is much different. Entertainment lawyers aren't all already gold, which I found out, sadly. But, so I think it's important to shadow. And I think if they're early in college or even, in high school, I think it's never too early to start. And I think there's a lot of people out there that would really enjoy having someone shadow. Like, I know we've done it before and, had.
Yeah. If you're taking a trip to a conference, just take your kid.
Yeah.
Let them see it.
Yeah. I mean, and an idea I gave a lot of high schoolers and college students, okay, say you're a senior in high school and you're going to Indiana University and you're thinking about majoring in biology to become a doctor, or actually let's do something easier. Let's say you want to be an attorney, right? Okay, well, go find on LinkedIn, go search for attorney, Indiana University. You'll find a whole list of people that may be connected to you, and not even realize oh, my dad knows this person. And then you could just message them on LinkedIn hey, I'm an Indiana student. I'm interested in your type of law. Would you mind if I set up an informational interview or shadow you for a little bit? I mean, I think it's easier to set up an informational interview and just ask questions for 30 minutes or grab lunch or something as opposed to shadowing for a whole day. But I mean, I think if you grab lunch, ask questions, I think that person would be delighted to let you shadow. And then also say you find out that is the career path you want. Well, now you have an ally that's invested in your future that when you graduate college could be, hey, I'm ready. Know anyone opening a job?
Yeah. You want to hire me?
Yeah. And so there's so many benefits from just doing that, putting yourself out there and really being curious about the career path that you want. But I mean, I think you can never start too early. And as parents, I think encouraging your kids and pushing them out there, whether it's conferences or shadowing your job or shadowing friends' jobs or whatever the case may be. I think that's a really good tool. Yeah, that's into my thought.
I think kind of putting a bow on the episode and trying to think through things is open, clear communication that's consistent over time. And each life stage is going to grow a little bit, and just add a little bit more of what you're doing, talking about finance. But the goal of talking about what they want to do for a career and talking about like finance in general is to help support them so they are sustainable and they can do things on their own to where they're not relying on you. And I think that's what most parents strive for. Some parents want their kids to do certain things, right? And they put those pressures on those kids. Again, try to avoid being that parent, but you just want them to be successful in their own right. And so helping them understand like what does success look like for them and what would they enjoy doing, and like giving that kind of vision of the future, and then finding ways to support them. If you know the attorney, you can help with that, or push your kid to do it and say, hey, this is how I would do it, but you need to do it. You need to take the action. I think that's the big thing of you can't always be the one to do it. So show them, teach them, teach the man how to fish versus just giving them a fish, right? So think about how to support them and encourage them and teach them, but let them kind of execute on what you share with them. And I think that's ultimately the best way to teach and help raise frugal, successful kids.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think when it comes to kids, there's, hundreds of, we'll call it tactics from a financial standpoint that you can employ depending on what the goals are and, what lifestyle you want your kids to have. Like we've talked about not going to college, there's alternatives for how you can invest for flexibility and stuff. So like there's always tactics regardless of what your goals are or the path that your kids want to go on. But yeah, I mean, ultimately to have a kid be successful, like you said, I think it just boils down to communication and education. Like those are the only two things that are going to make that's the only difference I see between wealthy kids that are successful, poor kids that are successful, and wealthy kids that are broke and poor kids that are broke. It's just, did they get the right education? Did they get the right tools in their life to put them in that position? I mean, luck plays a little factor, but it's really all boils down to parents and how good they were with helping their kids out. But
perfect. Good spot to wrap up.
Yeah, that wraps us up. And any closing remarks?
Stay tuned, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. The studio will get more filled out. We have some surprises and some cool stuff. So I'm excited to continue the conversations and have a environment to do it in. So
until next time, cheers, everybody.